Senator Hewitt?
Besides, someone who I really admire in this process has given me advice for about 10 years. And that is to be firm but flexible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor,
Yes, ma'am.
we do all, I believe we do all support higher education. And just for the record, I'd like to point out the fact that in your budget that you submitted last year, you had a 70% cut to TOPS. And it was the House Appropriations Committee that actually funded TOPS 100% and took the cuts somewhere else. And so the budget that came over to the Senate Finance Committee, HB1, had TOPS 100% funded. In Senate Finance, we actually added money to higher education. And so that victory lap that you're taking, I think we share that as well, because we added money to higher education and we added money to TOPS. And so I'd like to kind of be clear on the record on that.
Well, first of all, I don't think the record is unclear. We together chose to fully fund TOPS last year. The year before, it was not fully funded. I wanted to, but in the special sessions we had, in order to address the deficit that we inherited, there was not enough revenue to fix the problem. And so I can't remember exactly what the cut to TOPS was. I know it was front-loaded, I should say back-loaded into the spring semester. But that was in 2016.
Yeah, the budget.
That was.
I believe, sir, that the budget that you proposed last year did not have TOPS fully funded, and we added the money in the legislature. We added the money to fully fund TOPS in last year's budget.
Well, let's do it again.
I agree. Let's do it again. You gave
I'm
us a
ready to do
much
it.
bigger hurdle, though, to go from 80%.
I'm not giving you anything, Representative. I'm sorry, Senator Hewitt. I'm taking the money that's in the forecast, and we're budgeting against that. If you all had done what I asked you to do, I promise you there wouldn't be a cut in TOPS in my executive budget proposal this year. It was the short-term piecemeal approach that was taken by the legislature that sunsetted at 27 months, and that money goes away on June 30th. Absent that, you would not have that document in front of you that shows any cut to TOPS. And I have said it over and over again here today. I don't support that cut to TOPS any more than I support the cut to the DAs, the sheriffs, to higher education, to our partner hospitals, or any other critical health care, or anything else that's in it, but including your 5% cut to the legislature, or the 5% cut to the judiciary. I don't support any of those.
So let's talk about what the options are. So there's multiple options, and the options that you tend to go to are those that have to do with revenue. So let's talk about the things that you've done to look at expenses. You talk a lot about the task force report, the Budget and Tax Reform Task Force. As you know, the majority of the work that they delivered had to do with taxes. There was not very much work or airtime given to budget reform. But they did quote the Streamlining Commission as work that had previously been done that would be good to be implemented. Many of those recommendations had already been implemented. Many of them had not. So my question to you is, did you all look at that, and have you gone forward with implementing those things that were recommended from the Streamlining Commission work to reduce your expenses?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that a great deal of the projected savings that came from the Streamlining Commission were never realized. Now, they would decide how much an agency would save if it implemented those recommendations. They would budget to that number, and then the agency didn't realize the savings, and that's how we ended up, part of the reason we ended up with so many mid-year budget cuts. Secondly, when it comes to actions I've taken on the expense side, Senator, I have cut over $600 million state general fund in the 2 years I've been governor. Now, that is the most significant action that I can take as governor on the expense side. And those cuts have not been easy.
And help me understand that, Governor, because I'm having a hard time reproducing those numbers, the $600 million.
Well, I'll give you the list, but it is simple arithmetic. We had a $2 billion deficit for the first full year that I was governor. You raised revenue to address part of that. That revenue expires on June 30th. We're not here looking for $2 billion. You didn't raise $2 billion. You raised far less than that. And the difference is the cuts. Had I not cut money, we would still have a $2 billion problem. But I have a complete list of cuts that I'm happy to give you, all of state general fund dollars. And it adds up to more than $600 million.
I guess maybe my definition of a cut is different than yours. I mean, a $600 million cut, I would think, would be a difference, a reduction in state general fund dollars from one year to the next. And what I'm looking at is $8.7 billion in fiscal year 16, 9.1 in fiscal year 17, 9.4 in fiscal year 18 appropriated. I don't get the $600 million cut.
Well, I'll show you the list, and one of the things you're not taking into consideration are the required services that are imposed on us by law that we have to fund that go up every year. So if you, I mean, I can explain it to you. I can't understand it for you, and I'm not trying to be ugly about that.
Insulting.
But it's more.
Insulting.
No, but I'm not trying to be. It's more than just the difference in state general fund. You've got to look at the increases in state services that are required by laws that you all have passed and you haven't repealed them. And so it's not as easy as simply adding and subtracting one year's numbers to the next. You've got to really get into those numbers. But I have the list of more than $600 million in cuts. I'm absolutely happy to give them to you.
That would be great. I would love to see that because I do believe that that $600 million in cuts cannot be you adding to your wish list or adding inflation and then cutting. That doesn't count as a cut. It has
That's
to be
not what we did.
dollars less in state general revenue when you compare one year to the next, and I don't see it in the numbers that have been provided by our fiscal staff.
Yeah.
Senator Hewitt, well, I think one of the things, probably the confusion may lie, if you don't mind me interjecting here, is several years ago we had we had two periods where we had about a $400 or $500 million cuts or reductions, and one of the things we found out during that process is that we would reduce one agency by a certain dollar amount, they were allowed to backfill that money with not state general fund, maybe with some self-generated money, maybe with some fees that were left over. So the confusion lies in whether we're playing that we actually reduce the overall budget of an agency, or we reduce their state general fund dollars, but then allowed them to put more money through maybe some fees that they had left over, some self-generated revenue. I think that's the path that you possibly could be going down, which would lie the confusion between the two when the governor is discussing a reduction in state general fund and the senator's trying to look at it, not looking at total means of finance, not looking at just state general fund. And I think if you go back and look at those presentations that were made, I know the commissioner can speak to it because I remember it vividly. He would say we cut $400 million, and I would correct him and say, no, you only reduced $36 million because you were able to backfill everything else. We did this dance once before several years ago. So that might be the part where we're having some confusion. So as you move through trying to reconcile the numbers between the two, I think that's something you could probably look at to save both of you all some time. Now, Commissioner, I believe you were going to talk.
I think that may be part of it, but the other part of it is something that you all, I think, often are not mindful of, and that is the increase year to year in required expenditures related to services that you all mandate in law. And so you can cut in some areas and increase in others. And so if all you look at are the top numbers, you don't necessarily see what's below them. And I think Jay has...
Well, let me just add one thing that is being overlooked is that the budget that you inherited and we inherited had $860 million in one-time money that we replaced with recurring revenue. We said we're not going to have one-time money in the budget anymore. So in order to maintain the fiction that had existed in the previous administration that the budget was actually balanced, we said, no, it's not balanced because you've been using one-time money and we're not going to keep doing that. So the budget we imposed and the budget you approved has no one-time money so that you're not perpetuating this fiction that you're matching recurring expenses with recurring revenue. We're doing that now. We're only expending that comes back year after year after year, which is sound budgeting practice.
Thank you. Commissioner, the only numbers I'm looking at are from the last 2 years where you all have been in office. And I'm trying to follow the governor's statement that he's cut $600 million over the last 2 years, because I don't see it, not in state general fund, not in total means of financing. I do not believe the $600 million number is real. So if you all could provide some data to help us better understand that, I would appreciate that very much.
Sure.
I'd also like to ask about your statement about right size, the government is the right size. Because I don't know that I agree with that or I understand that. And one of the things that that I have looked at, and I know that you all have looked at this also, is what does it cost us to deliver services in the state of Louisiana relative to other states? And we know from the work that GNO Inc. has done that our numbers are high, that we are an outlier. We stand out because our cost of delivering services is higher than the other states. And so I question whether we do have the right size government, and that the task is not just to find the revenue to fund it, but again, perhaps we need to be looking at, is this the right size government? Are these the services that we need to be delivering? Have you all done that
Let me address that. I think what I was referring to there is we had, especially 2 years ago, but then to some degree again last year as well, we had a lot of discussion about what we wanted to fund in light of that $2 billion deficit. How much revenue do we want to raise in order to fund those things that we think are critically important to the state of Louisiana? And we settled on the amount of government that we have currently. So that was the point that I had. We've already heard from all the people behind me and many, many others. You all deliberated and talked amongst yourself and among the Senate, and we came out at the level where we are. And I'm not sure what GNO Inc. study you're talking about. But the fact of the matter is we run a balanced budget in Louisiana. That budget is balanced, and we know that we have the 5th lowest state and local tax burden in the country. So the idea that we are spending more than other states to deliver services is not one that I will agree upon. I can't tell you that there isn't some service out there that costs more, but there will be others that cost less. And I think that one of the things that is missing quite often is just the structure of our government relative to others, other states, I should say, that is constitutionally mandated, where we supplement the local spending so much from the state side. And so I think if all you looked at were the state dollars, you might come to a conclusion that is not valid if you took into consideration state and local spending.
No doubt, and their study looks at all of that. It is difficult to do the work to compare all of the states and know what's funded with state or local or federal dollars, and so you do have to do some significant work to really know that you're comparing apples to apples. But I do think that work is worthwhile doing, and I don't know how you can look at our state without looking outside your own boundaries to know if we're doing a good job.
No, but I'm just saying when you do that, you got to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
I
Because
agree.
when you do, I know we have the 5th lowest state and local tax burden. We're running a balanced budget. And so I don't believe we are paying more for services in terms of our state general fund. I know that unlike some other states around us who didn't expand Medicaid, we may have more dollars that we're spending on health care. But they're not consuming more state general fund dollars to do that. And so, but I'm happy to take a look at whatever study you've got. I don't believe I've seen it.
I think that would be worthwhile, and I'd be happy to forward that to you.
Okay.
I guess just to close my comment, Chairman, I do think that there are more opportunities on the expense side, and I do think that you all have really not spent the time in honestly looking at our expenses. And so, I do think that the things that you're proposing are dramatic and drastic, and it's not anything that we want to do either. But I believe that there are other opportunities to reduce the budget, and would really appreciate the fact that, if you all would spend the time to really drill down and look at those.
Yeah, and if you have specific ideas, we're happy to sit down and talk to you about them. Take a look at them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.